Okay. So I think we're good.
You have a great backdrop, a wood.
It's the wood for the winter. I'm in my basement. I needed a studio, so I just went down, put a couch down here in front of the wood, the actual wood that I'm supposed to use, but I can't use it now because it's iconic.
Very good.
Well, welcome. I'm so glad you could be on my show. Show. Yeah. A lot of my friends maybe don't know really who you are. So I'll introduce you to my audience, YANEER BAR-YAM. I'm very honored that you could accept this interview with me. Or maybe you should tell us what it is you do. I know it, but my audience might not.
So the background is that I'm a physicist and complexity scientist. What that means is that I work on problems where there are dependencies between parts of a system, and the traditional math of calculus and statistics is not sufficient to understand it. And the opportunity is that there's new math that can, because of working on a problem and understanding disease transmission. 15 years ago, I realized that the math was telling us that as the world becomes more connected, there is a transition behavior, so that it's not just that as the world becomes more connected, diseases are faster in getting around, but more and more severe diseases are faster and faster getting around. And that leads to a transition like boiling water, where you go to a different state, where instead of having transmission, you have global extinctions. And that's pretty scary. And so I started warning about this, and wasn't able to get a lot of traction, right? Just before the outbreak, everyone thought the world was okay. I worked afterwards on Ebola in West Africa and helped to clarify what the strategy is for getting rid of diseases that have such outbreaks. And the main understanding had to do with not waiting for people to show up in the hospital, but actually identifying them in the community and isolating them as soon as they have symptoms. And that stopped the outbreak. So I was trying to get the US government to do it, and they weren't acting fast enough. So I eventually got through to people who were working on the ground in West Africa, and they told me a little bit about what they were doing, and I said, well, why don't you do this? And they said, oh yeah, we started doing that 3 weeks ago. And the outbreak went up exponentially, and it went down exponentially, and went to extinction.
So what in practicality would that mean if we were to use your methods in Sweden? What is the practical? How would it I mean, explain it easy to people so people can understand it really down to earth, sort of.
Yeah. So the main point is that stopping transmission has to start in the community.
Yeah.
The community is where the transmission takes place. And surely it's very helpful if the government is helpful and is providing support and doing all kinds of things. But ultimately, if people in the community don't do things, then it's not going to stop. And if the community takes very strong action, then the community can stop it by itself. Again, it doesn't mean that it wouldn't be good for more things to happen, but the main location of the outbreak response is in the community itself. And
Sweden would actually be the perfect candidate because we have a very, very, I mean, we have such a rigorous system of systems. Everything in Sweden is systemized, and we have like a really good way to get people to do what we want. If we want someone to vaccinate, we can reach 97%, and we can do it by our channels, by our, I mean, our particular culture is like that. We can get a lot of information out to the public and make them listen. The problem now is that the government and the experts, so to say, the official experts, are they don't want that. They don't want that kind of information out, how to stop the disease, because they have fixated on the herd immunity strategy, which is quite obvious in Sweden. I think it's the only country in the world. And so, I mean, if we would use your method, what practical things would it be? Because now we only have 2-meter distance that nobody listens to. But would it be like face masks? Is that what you're talking about?
So when we talk about community, basically we have to identify how transmission takes place.
Yeah.
And the community has to decide that it's going to stop the transmission. The disease only lives when it transmits.
Yeah.
If it stops transmitting, it goes away within weeks. The people get sick, they have to be treated medically. But if we stop the transmission, then it will be gone within a few weeks.
Yeah.
Really 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do we stop the transmission? The answer is, we know transmission is through air, right? People breathe out and other people breathe in, coughing and sneezing, and also it lands on surfaces, so you don't want to touch shared surfaces. And in order to get to the point where we prevent that enough, we have strategies, which means that we have people stay at home. If everyone stayed at home, there would be no transmission beyond within people who live together, right? So the point is that, and if people have to go out, they have to be careful not to transmit to others. So using masks is super powerful to prevent transmission, and you have to have safe essential services, right? You don't want people to go to a supermarket or to a drugstore and to be infected. And then you have to worry about workplaces. If, the workplaces are essential services. So one of the key things is that people have shut down non-essential work in order to limit the transmission in the workplace. Now, all of that is just about making sure that there's no transmission. Now, beyond that, we take other precautions. Now, if we just did what I said right now completely, we wouldn't have the disease.
No.
But if someone gets sick, then we want to take extra precautions. We don't want them to infect their families or their housemates. So what we want to do is we want to identify people who have the disease and isolate them away from their families, and indeed even to quarantine the members that they might have been exposed, because people can get infected a little bit before they actually have symptoms. So we have to quarantine any contacts, anybody that was interacting with a person that gets sick. So that should be done for 14 days again, because that's the period of which people show symptoms. And we can figure out if they're sick or not. So the key is, if someone is sick, if they show symptoms, we want to isolate them. We want to quarantine anybody that they've been in contact with. And that's obviously, if everyone is already isolating, then you don't need that. But of course, people are not isolating 100%. They're going to get to the supermarket or drugstore. Even if they're wearing masks, you don't want to take risks, because masks are not 100%, so you isolate and quarantine people.
But we know all this. I mean, we really do know all this, because we had Ebola. It wasn't more than a few years ago, and there was a hysteria in Sweden. And I mean, I saw that even someone who got a fever, they got to the infection clinic center, and people were wearing space suits. and they were, really, I mean, they were really, really, and that's not a very infectious disease, as I understand.
It's only by physical contact, and
Yeah,
it's
you
yeah.
you you basically have to cough blood in someone's mouth or eyes to get it, but they were wearing spacesuits here in Sweden, and now when we get this disease that is really, really contagious. I mean, it looks like some people can infect a whole shop of shoppers just by going, to buy groceries, just by breathing, and everyone gets infected.
That's right, because it
And,
stays in the air
and
for hours. Yeah.
yeah, 3 hours I heard, or even more. And then what do we do? So I had a colleague who had, and I got a little sick, and I went to the infection control center. And there were nurses who they didn't even wear masks. They only had visors. When she, took a stick in my throat, and I was really struggling not to cough on her because she only had a visor. It was outside, but it was in a tent.
Look,
And
we
I
understand that Sweden has adopted a strategy that's based upon basically an academic theory.
yeah,
What's amazing is that this is hypothetical theory that someone has, become enamored of. It's one of the key points that we've seen in this outbreak is that governments, policymakers have relied very strongly on, quote, experts, academic experts. The problem is that many of the academic experts don't have experience in real world decision making. Right? An academic publishes papers,
mm,
and in publishing papers, they start with some hypothesis. Here's an idea, and at the end of the paper, maybe they show it's true or not based upon data, some data, but it's just one piece of information. You don't show it's true. You give evidence for it. Or you do a theoretical calculation. Epidemiology is, a lot of it is theory, right? So they do a theoretical calculation and they say what the result is if you make those assumptions. But they didn't prove that the assumptions are true. And so the nature of a contribution in academic discourse is not the same as the challenge of making decisions in the real world. Decisions in the real world, they have consequences, life and death consequences. But the
politicians
people,
need to make them.
yeah, people who, who knows how to make life and death decisions, who does them as part of profession is someone in the military,
Mm,
right?
exactly.
You have a commander in the military. If they make mistake, people die. And so they have a certain training to understand that the real world is unforgiving.
Yeah.
And if you make mistakes, you're going to be in trouble. And Sweden has a long history of excellence in decision making, really. And so this is very surprising that this
It
happens
is.
in Sweden.
It is. But I mean, you are one of the foremost experts in the world, I would say, on this disease. One of them. Would you say, when you look on Sweden, because Sweden is denying the herd immunity strategy, saying that we are doing what everyone does, but yeah,
No,
what would you say
there's
if you
no
if you,
doubt.
you it's are we doing herd immunity or not?
I don't know if it's possible for me to share, but you can show the list of countries that we have shown have been successful in
I know all that,
decreasing outbreak.
but I only want you to say to my audience, as a world expert on coronavirus, are we doing the herd immunity thing or not?
There's no doubt that Sweden is allowing its population to be exposed to the disease in a way that is not only inconsistent with the knowledge of what we need to do in order to suppress the outbreak, but is doing an unethical thing in allowing people to be exposed to it and to be severely ill and to die. And it doesn't make any sense from
Would
the.
you say it's a human rights violation on a
I
massive scale?
I would, no doubt. I mean, there are definitely countries where you can see that people don't understand something. You know, you'd have a leader who is not knowledgeable or ideological and therefore doesn't understand something in a standard way. And people are making mistakes in many parts of the world. It's not a perfect response in many places, but where you see that there is explicit knowledge and decision to do something that is clearly different from not only the base understanding, but also what is going on in other countries immediately around, right? So we see that Norway and Finland and other countries, that Denmark and so on, there are countries that did better and they did worse at the beginning. But over time, they realized that the right strategy was to eradicate the disease.
Yeah.
And they're at the point of eradication.
Mm.
And Sweden, if they made the decision to eradicate the disease, within a few weeks, the disease would be gone. And we know this because of the great successes in other places. There are places that are more difficult. There are places that are easy. Sweden doesn't have it so hard. The population is dispersed. The population pays attention to instructions. They're not rebellious. They're able to execute on a plan
On
and to
command.
bring it to fruition.
Yeah.
On command. And and the point is that with that kind of advantage, really it should be gone within weeks.
Yeah.
And every moment that you start to do it, you only take weeks. So
Yeah.
why would you wait? Why would anybody wait to
It only makes sense if you want the whole Swedish community to get infected and develop antibodies so that we would have an advantage in the world being immune. But as it turns out, in parts of Sweden, they have checked when they suspected. They suspected herd immunity by May or something. But we have the most antibodies we have is in Stockholm, and it's only 7%.
Yeah, but the point is that again, there's an idea, an hypothesized idea,
Yeah.
which costs tremendous life loss of life, and terrible disease. And on the basis of this hypothesized idea that it's good if you have a paper in an academic journal or you're doing experiments maybe on animals that you don't mind if they die. But to do that to a human population, we don't experiment on people.
No.
Just,
But I
okay.
think other countries are probably curious, watching us with horror when we do our experiment, but they're going to benefit from our mistakes. So it's like we're a petri dish. We are like an animal
It's enough
experiment.
already. We've
Yeah.
seen the experiment. Every experiment has already been done in the world. All of the possible experiments about what to do with this disease have been done. And what we know is clear. There is a path to hell, which is to allow this disease to propagate in the population. And there is a path to elimination of the disease, which involves strong action to separate people, prevent transmission, to drive the disease to extinction, and to eliminate it from the population. The only difficulties that people are facing is saying, hey, we've driven it down. It's now down low enough. So people say, well, let's open up. Much of Europe is at a stage where they have 100 cases or something like that per day. And they're not taking the necessary steps to get it to zero. They should get it to zero and be done with it. It doesn't take that long. We know because we can get an exponential decline, which is sufficient to get rid of the disease. But that's very different from what Sweden is doing.
I don't know.
I
I don't know if you know about, because this would be what I would be working on if it wasn't for the bigger issue in Sweden. I don't know if you heard about my struggle that I've been fighting for 3 months, that the elderly in care homes and above 60 with risk factors or above 80, they are not prioritized to come to the hospital to get oxygen, but they are left at home given morphine instead of oxygen because we don't have oxygen for them. So they are suffocating to death. And while they do so, we give them morphine to sedate them so it doesn't look so horrible. And to me, that's a higher priority to stop the more acute phase of this moral debacle, this moral human rights abuse that we are actually sort of murdering people, sort of.
I agree.
No.
I agree, and I think that your effort to expose this, your exposing of this, and your efforts to stop this, I commend you. I think that there is, look, if you that in and of itself would be sufficient for accusations of crimes against humanity to the
Yes.
people who are doing this. Where this is, totally unacceptable. Whatever you say, it is unbelievable that people are doing this. And what is being done to the population as a whole is unacceptable and unbelievable that they're doing this. Again, it's possible to understand that people make mistakes.
Yeah.
It is possible to understand, but this is not a mistake.
This is not a mistake. It's not a mistake. I've been writing to Louvain 3 months ago, and we all have reached out to all outlets, and they haven't done anything. Look, I mean, I know you were born in America, but you are Jewish heritage,
Yes.
and I have been sort of comparing the morality of what we are doing in Sweden to the Holocaust. Would that be unacceptable or an exaggeration from my part? Because I'm willing to.
I can say, look, I'm not a spokesperson. I'm a
No,
scientist.
but
But from my perspective, the reason originally that this concept of crimes against humanity was created was because of actions against people that is of this nature. We cannot allow in our world for individuals to be killed without uh, uh, understanding that it's unacceptable. Every life is of tremendous value, and to consider that there are many people who are being killed in a context that is, um, uh, in such a way, this makes no sense. I don't know how to say it. It 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 is totally unacceptable that we will allow it to take place.
thank you.
And what we are what we can say, what I can say is that the action, when there is such action, there has to be effort to organize. And the fact that you have been organizing people to understand what's going on is incredibly important. And the next step is to figure out how to take action. And the actions have two different directions. One is to protect yourself, to protect the people, and the other one is to hold people accountable. And there's
I can
no
tell you, I can give you an update. Since April, I have been working hard on getting together teams. I think I've started 6 of them. I think 3 dropped out, but right now I have at least 2 different teams working, and one of them is really promising. We have established contacts with super lawyers, and it is on the works. But of course, we understand that it might take up to 10 years before we get justice. So this is going to be hard work, but the logistics and the contacts and the network is being formed, and I am leading a fight to get these people to the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg, or even to make it happen that there's a tribunal, especially for these transgressions against the human rights of the Swedish citizens.
Yeah. And the only thing that I would add to it is I'm still focused first on saving the lives that are still present. And for that, we need to mobilize the communities,
Yeah.
to take responsibility. If the government is doing the wrong thing, the people have to take responsibility away from the government and act on their own behalf.
Yeah.
And I know that it is difficult. Sweden is not an easy place for people to say, hey, we're going to take power away from the government, but lives depend on it. And I hope that people will make the decision to band together and to take responsibility for each other and to stop this nonsense.
And I've said this since April. I consider myself a soldier right now, an online soldier, if you will, because this is about self-defense. And for a country who has actually not been at war at all for 200 years, this is a wake up to a harsher reality that we haven't seen in generations.
Yeah, yeah. And look, I would I would like to be of help in any way I can. I've been also trying to invite people to take action, and the strategy for taking action continues to be the same strategy that I'm advocating in other places, because whether the government is doing it because of intention or whether they're doing it because of ignorance or whatever their reason that they're doing it, eventually the action that needs to be taken is the same. People have to take responsibility on themselves, practice the measures by which they can be safe, and create geographical areas, we call them green zones, right, where the disease is not present, and expand those areas over time to cover the entire country and really the world. And I would also look and see whether the countries around, particularly Norway and Finland, can be helpful.
They will. Even
Can,
Finland even gave out their hand to the government. We can help you if you would accept our help.
and again,
No,
if the government doesn't accept help, the people can go and get help.
yeah.
And
I'm writing. I have called out to the World Medical Association, and I can on this video too continue to call out for help. Actually, I am calling out to help to leaders of nation states, diplomats, anyone, famous people. I mean, we need every resource to get publicity, number one, and then action. You've done a lot with your credibility to this fight just to be here on my channel, and I am very grateful to that. Thank you, YANEER BAR-YAM.
yeah, and let me know if I can be of help, because I'll be happy. What I can help with is the specifics of the actions.
Yeah.
Will enable and how to do because I've heard now that they're starting to actually provide testing. And again, I don't know how well they're doing the testing or how effectively they're reporting it or how long it takes to get the results. But the main challenge is, even without testing, to figure out how to ensure that there is no disease in the community, and then to enable the community to act, to expand the safe areas. And in Sweden, it's possible to do it because there are areas that are low population areas that one can create boundaries around that will become safe areas for people. And the more you can create safe areas, the more people can function in a normal way.
I will take you up on that. I will contact you, but right now we're a bit away from that phase, because right now we have a population to inform, and it's not out. It's like in small communities all over Sweden, people are whispering about it, but the news hasn't blown up. So the majority of the people aren't informed, and therefore the movement, I mean, the people that are on Tegnell's and Löfven's side are still much greater and more powerful than us that are. So we're going to have to do this underground work a bit more. But when I feel that we have a real wind in our sails, I will contact you for more specific help in this. And I'm very grateful for your capacity to feel for our small country.
I again, if there's something that I can do to be of help, let me know. In the meantime, I will be pushing as much as I can from
Yeah.
the side.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Okay.
Mm.